What's good, YouTube? It's me, your boy Squiddy, back again with another video. Today, I want to quickly talk about how to beat tier limits with rogue decks, so like non-tier decks. Obviously, tier limits are like the best deck by far in the format. They're really close, if not tier 0. And usually every time there's like a tier 0 deck or like a definitive tier 1 best deck, all the other decks that can contend against it in the metagame are obviously, number one, you have to concede that you're not playing the best deck. So in order to be the best deck, you're typically playing cards that are specifically aimed towards stopping that deck. So like things like floodgates, things that prevent them from playing, essentially things that nerf their engine, because when you go engine to engine, like you're always going to lose just because their engine's way more powerful and they have access to like basically so much more that the typical deck can do. In the form of obviously the Ishizu cards, and then on top of like their fusion toolbox that they have. So yeah, really quickly, I want to talk to you guys about how to beat it. First and foremost, you have to play around a lot of cards. So like on this page, I'm kind of showing you guys what to play around. First and foremost is Havness. This hand trap slash like tier limits name slash like fodder for fusing is just nuts. It does so much for the deck. If you walk into a Havness, like let's say you win the die roll, you go first, and you walk straight into Havness, you could just lose the game right there on the spot from one chain link. Like for example, if they mill like multiple names, maybe a shuffler, all of a sudden they have Kitkalos, they have the ability to either add a card to their hand to set up for next turn on top of having a 2300 body, or they can even fuse on your turn. They could make Rukalos, they could make even Kaleido Heart in your turn to disrupt you as well. So there's a lot of like, Havness essentially is like one of the best cards in the deck, given that if you just walk right into it, you pretty much die. So if you're playing a non-tier deck, you generally want to play around this. And the thing with Havness is it's worded when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. So this is a win effect. It's not if, obviously. So it does, it's a trigger effect that has to chain directly to the effect of the monster on the field. So if you're going to normal summon something like a tour guide and you activate the effect, obviously you're exposing yourself to Havness. So generally you don't want to do that immediately. You want to, play your cards in a way that you get access to things that can protect you from Havness before playing your card. For example, in Sprite, let's say you have a hand with Nimble Beaver and Pot of Prosperity. Like a lot of players might think, oh, I'm just going to summon Nimble Beaver first just to thin out my deck. Then maybe I can see what prosperity will get me. If, for example, if they like imperm my beaver, I might want to get an extender, so on and so forth. But you don't really want to do that because, again, you just walk into Havness. Whereas if you play Potter's Prosperity first, you can kind of dig for 3 or 6 cards that can protect you from that. For example, things like Called by the Grave, any Bestial, any cards that can give you that add layer of protection. So if they have the Havness, you're like, okay, I can stop at least one of the names engraved, I can stop this from resolving. And then, I don't just lose on the spot. So always, always, always like see if there's any way you can, in your deck, you can sort of get ways to your protection before using the effect. In the same time, you also, maybe you want to play around it as well. So like, I don't know, if you have like a Sprite hand, maybe you have something like a Swap Frog and a Sprite Carrot. If you go summon Swap Frog, like maybe you don't want to use the effect. I don't know if people still do because it's Roman's banned, but like let's say that, for example, you wanted to use the effect, but maybe it's just better to not use the effect. Like previous format, you would not use the effect to play around Gamma. This is kind of like the same thing. You don't want to play in the Havness, so maybe you just normal summon that, special summon the Carrot, and then overlay for Gigantic, and then you use the effect, which you're safe, because if they chain Havness, it doesn't really matter if they mill a name, because on the same chain, Gigantic's going to resolve, and then you're going to prevent players from special summoning level 2 or higher. So even if they mill a name, it doesn't really matter because they're not able to fuse. So again, just like always remember to play in a way that you can play around Havness. Other cards you have to play around, obviously, Kelbeck. If a card is sent from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard, except during the damage step, you can target one special summon monster your opponent controls, special this card from your hand. So, like, a lot of times, obviously, if you're playing a non-tier deck, the easiest way to play into this, obviously, besides them milling you, is when you drop any hand trap. Because when you send a card from your hand to the graveyard, that still counts as a card being sent from the hand to the grave in your opponent's hand. So Kelbeck would be able to meet its trigger and then activate on a new chain after, for example, if you happen to ash something like a Havness effect in the hand, they could just activate Kelbeck to bounce one of your monsters beforehand. So obviously keeping that in mind, try to sequence, your hand traps in a way where you're not really too concerned about your field getting bounced, unless, of course, you have no choice. Just always keep in mind that this is a card, and on top of them disrupting you, they actually get a level 4 body as well with 1800 defense, which is actually bigger than you would think. And not getting rid of this actually puts you in a terrible spot because they have a body. So on their turn, even if they like, let's say for example they go normal Rhino, effect is Sand of Happiness effect, you go Bestial, which like, yeah, you stop the name from activating in the grave from resolving, but they still have 2 level 4 bodies, so they can instantly make a lot of cards in their toolbox. So like obviously Zeus comes to mind first and foremost. Some people are playing Exciton Knight, which is another option. Obviously there's also Baguska, which is a third option, which just happens to shut down like a lot of the non-tier decks at the moment. Like it shuts down Flunders, shuts down Sprites, shuts down a lot of things that you actually have to have an answer for this card using something besides a monster effect. So it's almost like a mini Mystic Mind. So again, you definitely you want to play around this card if you can during your turn to the best of your ability, because them getting the body is never a good thing either. So yeah, just make sure that you have this accounted for. And then obviously like the shufflers, just the best way to sort of play around these is just to use your effects one at a time on a chain. For example, like, I don't know, if you have a graveyard based deck, maybe you want to, if you playing Sprite, for example, maybe you go Sprite Elf, target something to sort of bait these out, and then they're shuffling. And then we can maybe put something else in the graveyard that we want to reborn on the following turn, something like a maybe a Sprite Blue or an Hyperia or whatever. You want to play in a way that they forces them to sort of use this, and then you put your stuff in the graveyard. Same thing in the Naturia deck. Like maybe you just want to put one Mo Cricket in the graveyard, and there's some way that you can sort of bait this out by, making a Naturia Beast, activating Mo Cricket, they shuffle it back, and then you can put the rest of your cards in the graveyard, things like the Camellia, the Mo Cricket, so you have targets for the Naturia quick play spell cards during their turn. So again, you don't want to dump stuff on the same chain. Don't want to dump stuff at once. Like for example, 2 cards in the graveyard that activate at once. You don't really want to put them in the graveyard at the same time because these hit both at once. So obviously you want to bait them out one at a time if you can. And in the same vein, Pearl Rhino, obviously these cards, when they have them in the graveyard, Pearl Rhino on a new chain can actually activate if they choose to shuffle back one of their own tier cards from their graveyard to their deck, because it does count as a tier element's name being shuffled from their graveyard into the deck. And then this gets to pop a card on a new chain as a trigger effect, so it's kind of like a Zodiac Trident. So definitely you want to keep that in mind as well. A lot of times they set up, even if you have like a lot of Bestials and whatnot, they might just have a Pearl Rhino on field, which with one of the shufflers like Eldor Medora in the grave. So again, that is something to note, is that they do have that quick play pop. So generally, maybe you want to get rid of, you either want to bait it out beforehand before pushing through your plays, or for example, if you have a Floodgate, maybe you want to bait out the Pearl Rhino pop first, and then on their turn flip the Gozen Match or the Rivalry or whatever you have to get rid of their board. And then it doesn't really matter if they pop it later on. It's already kind of giving you value because you got rid of, like, if they have like 4 monsters on the board, maybe you have like a Gozen Match or something and you flip it and you get rid of like 2. So yeah, it's just like just keeping that in mind as well. And then moving on really quickly, some cards that you can I think every non-tier deck that wants to contend in the metagame should definitely be playing some of these. There are obviously some more cards that don't really come to mind immediately for me right now, so if you guys have any more options, definitely post below. But obviously D-Shifter, if you're playing like a deck like Flunder or Sprite, whatever, this card is really, really devastating. We saw even in YCS Dortmund, there's a Pendulum player that was citing this because it's so unexpected. Like, Pendulums doesn't really care about the graveyard. Yeah, your cards get banished when they leave the field instead of going in your extra deck, but it doesn't really matter because this hurts tiers way more. So, like, playing a card that basically says tier cannot play, like, their only way to play through Shifter is either to pass and then, like, hope that they can stop you on your turn with things like Happiness and not die, or they can make a rank 4 push. So like something like a Bagusa. For example, you drop Shifter on their turn, they activate Agido from their hand because you sent the card from your hand to the graveyard, or Kelbeck, and then they normal summon a level 4 and they make Baguska or Zeus. Those are typically their 2 options. I would say Baguska more than not. Also, some players do side things like Skill Drain to sort of as a countermeasure to D-Shifter. So those are some things to be aware about. But generally, D-Shifter does shut down their entire turn. So if you are playing a deck that can incorporate Shifter in any way means possible, like if it has more plays than one without using your graveyard, you probably want to play D-Shifter if you can, because it's just such an oppressive card. It should definitely be banned in my opinion because it's so one-sided. All these turn skip cards. But again, if you do have space, definitely play it. Other cards are obviously the Bestials. Truce Worm, Magnamut, Saronir, these cards are goated. They're super, super good because number one, they get rid of the name in the graveyard, and then they also give you a body. Whereas things like DD Crow and Ghost Spell, yeah, they're all right, but they don't, like, they're neg 1. They get rid of the name, which they milled from Dax. So the tier player didn't really expend a lot of resources to do that. You're just going neg 1. You don't get a body. And there are also cards that don't really do anything in a grindy game state, right? Whereas Magnamut, you know, you search one in the end phase, that's already crazy. Truce Worm, it sends something, you know, even Saronir is a 2500 beat stick. And then on top of that, you can also make these 2 level 6s. So these rank 6s, you can make Beatrice, for example, if you're playing a deck like Naturia, you can always send Naturia Sacred Tree off of Beatrice, so it gives you some value there, and you can also go into Zeus after that if you have space. Wallow, obviously, super, super crucial because monsters you control gain 100 attack and defense for every card in your opponent's graveyard, which is versus tiers. Like, if they have a huge graveyard of like 20 cards, your monsters are gaining like 2,000 attack, which is super, super relevant. On top of having the quick effect where you can disrupt, you can detach 1 or 2 materials from this card, activate the appropriate effect, target 1 card in your opponent's graveyard, return to the deck, or if the target's a monster, special summon it face up or face down defense position to your field. If not, set it to your field. So number one, it's a disruption during either player's turn for the tier name. So if they activate a tier name, you can detach to target one the tier name and then shuffle it back to the deck, kind of like what the shufflers do, like Medora and the other guy, Keldo. And then the other effect is you can target a monster to either special summon it to your field. So you can special summon something like a Magnamut and then use the effect to search in the end phase if they happen to have that in the graveyard. Or you can even set like spells and traps, you know, like there are a lot of good targets as well. Things like if you have a deck that is playing Super Poly already, maybe you can set their Super Poly if they're playing Super Poly and then use it against them, for example. It just gives you a lot of options, this card. So I think it's nice that these bestials feed directly into the rank 6s. Magnamut is another card that obviously lets you search in the end phase. So just off one end phase Magnamut, you just get a free rank 6, which is super, super important. Other card you should, if you have the money, I guess it's kind of non-budget. Fenrir, I think they're like $60 or $70 each, pretty expensive. But again, this card is generally really, really good against tiers as well, given that their only real out is kind of Suliak to negate the effect. Otherwise, you kind of are guaranteed for a 2-for-1 because you do get the banishing effect when they chain a monster to kind of stop you, and then you get the search one as well. So this is a nice card to have if you can't afford it. Other alternatives, actually, Alpha the Master of the Beast is also decent because it's a 3,000 attack body, which is super relevant, especially against when they have big monsters like Rukalos, 2,800 plus a Suliak. Generally, their only way of getting rid of this would be to Suliak something and then fuse, or like go Merly fuse and then make Kaleido Heart. Otherwise, this is also like a 2-for-1 because you get to bounce a card. So if they negate with like Suliak, and then you get to attack over something. So you get the battle phase because the attack is so big. This is another card that could definitely fit in the side deck or the going second as well. And on top of being like a body that has 3k, you can link off with it afterwards. It's really, really good as well. I've seen some OCG players also side this against Interior Mirror. It's a decent card, but again, the other out they have is one of the shufflers in the grave, and then they banish the shuffler to shuffle back one of their tier names, and then Perlorano to pop. But again, that is still a 2-for-1 because you're getting rid of the field spell pop plus the shuffler in the grave, so they can't disrupt anything in your graveyard if you play like a graveyard deck. Oh, I just DC'd. Other cards you should definitely be playing are, Floodgates if you can. Obviously, Soul Drain and Necro Valley come to mind immediately because of the fact that Soul Drain does, it's really, really hard for them to get rid of besides using a monster like Zeus. Or like normal summoning one of the shufflers or special summoning on the board, and then having Perlorino, they can actually banish one of them to target one of the tier names in their graveyard, shuffle it back, and then trigger Perlorino to pop Soul Drain. They can't even do that with Necro Valley just because they cannot move any cards from the graveyard to a different place. So Necro Valley is even harder for them to get rid of. I'm pretty sure like Zeus is one of their only main deck outs besides like Heartbeat. So yeah, just something to keep note of. These two cards, if your deck can play it, definitely play these cards. And Soul Drain's nice because you can actually special summon back from your graveyard. So if you're playing Sprite, you can still use Sprite Elf to special summon something back, whereas Necro Valley kind of shuts that off completely. But again, Necro Valley being a spell is also nice because when you go second, you can activate this and it effectively shuts down any disruption that they have past the monsters that they have on the board. So if they have Dragostapelia, obviously it's still live, but then like Havnus, any of their mills from that, any of the shufflers in the graveyard are basically dead because Necro Valley hits the table and resolves. So yeah, just something to keep track of there. Same thing with the Mystic Mind. It's obviously really, really good going second because it shuts down their entire graveyard plus hand plus field. So if you play a deck that can actually somehow incorporate Mystic Mine. Definitely see if you can play it, because their only main deck out are Heartbeat. Some players that weren't even side decking anything like beyond like one Heartbeat, I think, at YCS Dortmund, just because they didn't respect non-tier decks. They're only respecting like the tier mirror. So yeah, a lot of players can actually get punished by this, especially if you're able to make like a you can like pressure your opponent. If you're playing like a trap deck, for example, activate Mystic Mine set 5, which is already really decent because it gives you a lot of time to burn through their board and sort of grind through the game until you get rid of your mine, and then hopefully you're in a better position to just take control of the game from there. And then Ultimate Slayer, this is actually a card that no one's playing right now, but I think it's kind of under the radar because it's really, really good against a lot of tier boards if they have Dragostapelia or Rukalos. Obviously, sending as a cost, you send Entis, so it bounces the monster threat on the board, and then Entis activates into new chain, so you can get rid of any spell or trap disruption that they might have. So things like a face down Suliek or a Perlorino that they have on board if they have like a shuffler and graveyard. So like you just get rid of the pop preemptively. And I think this card is actually really, really decent in decks that you don't really care about your extra deck as well. You have the space. So obviously things like Flunderies, it might be something you want to try because you can incorporate a lot of Entis and other cards as well. There are Meteorologic Aggregator. I think it's a newer card that just came out as well. Basically, when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one face-up card on the field and negate its effects. So again, this does negate any face-up card effects. So it doesn't have to be a monster. You can negate Perlorino or a face-up Suliek, for example, or you can just negate another monster effect. So it's always a 2-for-1 with Ultimate Slayer. And again, you do have Trouble Sunny as well. If you just want to happen to play against a Link deck, you can just send this for Elf. Obviously, it's pretty bad when they have Elf that points to like a Dragostapelia. You can choose to side in like Trouble Sunny. If you already have it in your extra deck, you can actually side the Evil Twin, Kiskill, and Lala. So this one here that obviously pairs with the Trouble Sunny, given that after you send the Link, you can banish Trouble Sunny, send this from your deck to the graveyard as a cost to non-targeting send something on the field to the graveyard. So again, this card's basically always a 2-for-1. But yeah, I can see how it's kind of bad against when they have Elf plus like a fusion monster, because then you can't really like, I don't know if you really want to side this in against tiers. It just seems kind of bad unless they have Elf. But when they don't have Elf, generally, like if you can get rid of the Elf, or even because a lot of times they end up playing anyways. So like, let's say you play into the Elf and they're like, or you go like end of battle phase, end of main phase, they go Elf effect, get Merly, and then they fusion summon again. And then let's say you're able to kill the Elf somehow, you can actually Ultimate Slayer one of their other fusion disruptions that they have on the field, because their end board is never really truly their end board. They're always going to summon more fusion monsters, and you know, at any point in the game, usually this is pretty live as long as you have the end test to get rid of. So yeah, those are some quick tips. If you guys have any other thoughts or suggestions, let me know in the comments below. Definitely like, rate, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.